A Gen X viewer left me this comment this morning, and it perfectly explains why so many people feel like they can't retire. I'd love to retire yesterday with the die with zero strategy, but how do you deal with taxes, healthcare, social security collapsing, long term care, inflation, and why did a calculation say that I need $5 million? So, if that's a question that sounds familiar to you, then this video is right where you need to be at this moment. So, let's get into it. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm Salvado. I retired early at 51, and not because every risk that I had was solved, but because I finally understood which ones actually mattered. And this comment, believe it or not, isn't unusual. It's the Gen X retirement mindset, really, in one paragraph. So let's walk through it simply and honestly. First, I want to talk a little bit about why Gen X feels stuck. And it's not because Gen X is irresponsible. In fact, we're overinformed. We lived through market crashes, disappearing pensions, rising healthcare costs, and constant messaging that we were behind. So when a calculator says you need $5 million, it doesn't feel crazy. It almost feels like confirmation. And the problem is that number is based on assumptions that don't really match most people's real lives. One of the biggest fears is the access to money before 59 and a half. And here's the shift that matters. Your retirement doesn't start with your 401k, it bridges it. Early retirement is about flexibility, not emptying accounts early. Most people don't fail here because of math. They fail because they assume there are only two options: work forever or pay penalties. Then, when you start taking a look at healthcare from 50 to 65, folks, healthcare is real. And this is a really valid concern. But it's often priced as if costs never change, your income never adjusts, and Medicare never arrives. But let's put it in perspective. That period between 50 and 65, those are bridge years, not lifetime expenses. When you stop treating healthcare like a permanent crisis and start treating it like a temporary gap, the fear that you have around healthcare starts to drop because you realize it's a temporary situation that you have to solve for a specific period of time. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Social Security collapse. There's a lot of conversation in the news. There's a lot of discussion about Social Security becoming insolvent at some period of time. Now, everything that I've heard is that it's not that Social Security is going to collapse. It's that they may find themselves in a situation where, in order to remain solvent, they have to lower or reduce the amount that's paid out. The way that I understand Social Security, again, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, the way Social Security works is Social Security is really a trust fund. So it's a fund that's funded somehow, and I don't know all the details there, but like with any trust fund, it's invested somehow. And over time, there are returns that are calculated on whatever that amount is that's in the trust fund. So you're basically paying for everything out of the interest. And once you start paying beyond what the interest is paying, you could find yourself in a situation where now you're going down into that principal. And the conversations that are happening now around Social Security, I haven't read one article that says Social Security is going away completely. I've heard articles and read articles that said that Social Security is being reduced. And so the first thing I want to start with is reduced is not zero. And Gen X, we have the tendency to assume that if it's not guaranteed, I won't count it. And that single assumption alone can add hundreds of thousands, even millions to retirement projections. So Social Security doesn't need to save you. It just needs to exist. Remember, Social Security was never designed to cover a person's entire retirement. It was designed to help offset some of the costs of retirement and your expenses in retirement. So by reducing it, let's say it's 5%, 10%, 15, 20%, I'm not saying that that's not going to have an impact on people's lives, because I absolutely think it will, but it's not going away completely. So when we go into that alarmist mode of, oh my God, everything's going to hell in a handbasket because they're going to strip away Social Security, are they going to strip away Social Security? I highly doubt it. Is it going to get reduced? That's everything that I've read. So I would suggest that you go out, you do your research on it, understand it, get a factual basis for however you feel about it, and then we can move forward from there. The next piece is long-term care. And long-term care is expensive and it's unpredictable. And that unpredictability is what really makes it scary. But here's a key distinction. This is a late life risk and it's not an early retirement risk. So it's not necessarily in the auspices of stuff that we're going to have to deal with in the immediate sense. But it's something that when you're in your 80s or your 90s that you're going to need to make sure that you plan for, so you might have some time. But a lot of people delay retirement today because of something that may or may not happen decades later. And that's backwards. I'll tell you about a conversation that I had with my financial advisor prior to my retirement. I had a lot of these same concerns. I was worried about Social Security, worried about long-term care, worried about a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, I think it might make sense for me to continue working. And so my financial advisor said, look, your retirement plan is designed for you to live to 100. And if you use long-term care, then that's probably going to be later on in life. Do you want to sacrifice the best parts of your life for the worst parts of your life? And I said, absolutely not. Because if I have to take long-term care insurance or any of those types of things, those happen later on in life, 80s, 90s. And by then, I probably won't be doing as much as I am right now. So do you want to not be able to do stuff now because you're worried about what's going to happen in the last 10 years of your life? And I said, no. So that was it. To me, that was backwards. It put me where I needed to be. Now, we do have long-term care insurance. Don't get me wrong. But I'm not putting too much on that because at some point that'll work itself out. And I would suggest that even for those of you on the channel, because the majority of you out there are either retired or are in your Gen X years and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get there, look at it now as something that you want to look at as a plan. Figure out what the cost is on a monthly basis for you to get the insurance, put that into your retirement expenses, and move on. Be done with it. The other thing that came up was the idea of inflation and market crashes. Now, here's what I'm going to say is that market crashes don't end retirements. It's the inflexibility that does. During the 2000 recession, my mom either was retired or had just retired or something like that. But anyhow, I think she had already retired by then. But in the 2000 recession, when mom retired, her portfolio was down 40%. So she said, I'm just not going to spend as much. So she didn't spend as much. And she turned out okay because the markets recovered. If she didn't have any other way to live her life except for the specific way that she may have outlined in her plan leading up to retirement, then it might be a problem. So it's that inflexibility that creates a problem for you. Early retirement isn't about predicting the market. It's about having room to adjust spending when those conditions change. So the conditions are going to change because there's different things that happen in the market. You have inflation, you have the cost of things. There are things that are just going to go on. But waiting for certainty, it may feel safe, but it's really a risk in and of itself. Then we move over and we talk about the $5 million calculator risk. So why do calculators say $5 million? And I know there's different ones. Tell me what your calculator says. Some calculators say $1 million, some say $5 million. I tend to stick with $1 million because that's what I've always heard. But this person said their calculator said 5 million, and I know there's other people that said 2 or 3 million based on where you live. But the problem is they assume that you'll spend the same forever, which we know is not the case. Because if you're going to the club now, you're not going to be going to the club when you're in your 70s. If you are, you're going to be the old dude at the club, and everyone's going to be talking about you anyway, so you're not going to get there. They assume that you'll never adapt. Things are going to happen. Things are going to change. Things are going to occur, and they either occur while you're still working or they occur when you're retired. But at the end of the day, we do the same thing either way. We adjust. We have to be flexible with what it is that we're doing. They assume that you'll never use your home equity. And most of us that have bought homes have a significant amount of equity in our homes. And if we don't, we will at some point. And if we downsize or any of those measures, then we may be able to tap into the equity of our house. And that you'll die with money left over. And folks, that's not die with zero. So when you're looking at that 5 million, it's not die with zero, it's die with X amount. I know, for example, in our retirement plan, We look at what our expenses are, what we have saved, and what our expected returns are. And we anticipate having more at the end of life than we do now because of the way that the markets move and the returns work and the historical data in the market. But that also requires us to be fairly conservative and intentional about how we spend, which would hope that each of you are doing now in terms of being intentional with how you spend. So it's not dying with zero that you're dealing with in this scenario. It's dying with fear because these calculators just create fear. And it's not the calculators that are evil. They're just limited. The are their basic understanding is in formulas, not humans. So it's not going to anticipate that something is going to happen or that something is going to change or that you're going to do something different later on in life because it's a formula, it's an algorithm, it's it's static. It's unless a person goes in and changes it. So I just don't know that I would put myself too far back in retirement because of these calculators without fully understanding what these calculators are actually telling you and taking into account the specifics of your circumstance. Then the last one is around your home equity, and that's really the missing piece. The commenter said something really important. If there was a way to use home equity, that would help. And my response is exactly. Generation X didn't get pensions. We got houses. We didn't have pensions. We got houses. We said we want to go out and buy a house. I want to buy a house. And as opposed to getting a huge pension, we took that money and said we want to secure a future by buying a house. And so now you have a bunch of people my age that own houses, and not everybody has a mansion and not everybody has a shack. It's all in between, but home equity changes a few things. It changes your later in life spending because as soon as you sell that house later in life, guess what you have? You have cash flow coming in. Your long-term care options. I don't know exactly how it works from a Medicare perspective, but if you go into long-term care like a nursing home or something like that, there's some provisions in there where they'll put a lien against your house because they want to use those assets as a way to pay for some of your long-term care to help offset what Medicare is paying, but not have you in a situation where you're on the street because you can't go in and so on. So having a house, having the equity in the house adds a new layer or new dynamic to that. It helps with legacy decisions. You think about who you're going to leave what to, and it allows you to create generational wealth. Because let's say you own a house that's a $500,000 house and you've been paying on it for 30 years, you pay it off. Well, that's $500,000 that you can give to somebody else that sits under what gets taxed. So there's a lot of things that are wrapped up inside of that. And ignoring it is one of the biggest reasons retirement numbers get wildly inflated. When you look at that $5 million dollars and you start looking at what the calculators tell you, they take in a lot of pieces of information that really don't go into um, how you live your life, what your expenses are, what you think your expenses are going to be, and so on. So don't allow yourself to fall too deep into that rabbit hole. So just in closing, I want to say that I didn't retire because I had every risk solved. I retired when I realized that some risks were exaggerated. I think I've mentioned before that I was a B student because I think A students spent too much time studying, and I think C students were having too much fun. But as a B student, I could graduate from school, I get the job, and I'm able to do what it is that I need to do, and I was able to graduate. I didn't think if I don't get all A's, then I'm not going to get into the best graduate schools or whatever, what have you, because none of that ever came to pass. Some of the calculators and some of the information is the stuff that you're learning and that you're gleaning, and some of the risks are mistimed. Sometimes there's windows of opportunity when things happen, and everything doesn't take into account every set of circumstances. The other thing I realized about a bunch of these risks are that some didn't matter as much as I thought. I was really under the impression that 2.5 years into my retirement, I'd be worried about money. I really thought that. As much as I trust my financial advisor, as much as I trust my wife, as much as I trust other retired people that I talk to, I was like, none of you guys know my specific circumstance because I tell each of you, go out and analyze your specific circumstance. Well, guess what happened? They were right. I was wrong. I'm actually better off now than I was before. Not that I'm rich, but better off now than I was before. And I could see the pathway for being better off in the future than I am right now because things start to make sense. When you don't have the capacity to think about things in totality or look at the bigger picture because of the demands of work and some of those factors, you're not able to think things through in the way that is going to give you the clarity that you might need. So Gen X, I'm here to tell you, doesn't need perfection. We just need permission to think differently. That's why I'm here every week dropping these gems on you because every one of us has an opportunity to look at things different. Because let's face it, just like the millennials and the Gen Zers look at us and say we're out of touch and we don't know what the hell we're going on and we're not using words like bussin' and all that kind of stuff. Guess what's happening? We're looking at our parents saying the same thing because we went through as Gen X a tremendous amount of change. We were the latchkey kids. We saw technology take over. We're trying to figure out why everybody is up in arms about AI when we saw the last computer revolution. And I know there's some of us out there that are, but we learned how to adapt and deal with a bunch of ish that was sitting out there because stuff was not easy. So now we had to learn how to think differently for all those things, and we have to continue to do that. So so if you're Generation X trying to make sense of early retirement without any hype or gurus, this is the channel for you. So that's I wanted to make this a quick video. It's never my expectation that everybody retire early, but it is my expectation that you live your best life. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one short. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you for the comment, and I will talk to you soon.